Hi everyone. In this webinar, we will be talking about one of my favorite subjects, literacy. We all have our own definitions of what literacy means, who it's for, and how we should work on it. As we're talking about literacy, I think one of the first things to think about is who literacy is for. Who should we be instructing in literacy? At the emergent literacy level, it's really important that we think about what does that mean? Does it mean an age? Are people who are emergent literacy learners people who are young? Are they preschoolers? Well, I think that's a common idea, but it's not actually true. Now, Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver are two of the people who are most influential in this area in our world, really. And what they say about this is that emergent literacy is not age dependent, but it's based on experiences with print. So you can be someone who is at an emergent literacy level, who's a preschooler or a kindergartner or a middle schooler or a high schooler or a 35-year-old adult. It's really about how much you have had experience, exposure, instruction, and literacy. When we think about literacy, all of us have ideas about what that means. I think sometimes we think that literacy is understanding letters and knowing the names of letters and reading connected text, being able to write, handwriting or typing. Literacy is composed of those things, reading and writing, but it's not just reading and writing. And that's why speech-language pathologists should be very much involved in literacy development, because literacy means speaking and listening in addition to reading and writing. These four things, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, all work together and impact each other as we're developing our literacy skills. So if you work on reading, you're going to impact writing and listening and the ability to speak. If you work on someone's communication skills, their speaking or use of augmentative communication, you're going to impact their writing skills. When we think about augmentative communication, in some ways, augmentative communication is really even though we think about it as a tool that we use to help us express ourselves like speech, it really is more similar to writing because it's a visual representation of language. It's the use of symbols to express ideas, but it's visual symbols, right? So let's look a little bit at some of the research that we have on literacy development. This particular research project I think was extremely impactful to me. This was done by Janice Light and David McNaughton. The research said that, the research looked at participants ages 3 years old to young adult with multiple special needs, including autism, CP, Down syndrome, developmental apraxia, multiple sensory impairments, and complex communication needs. So as you're watching this, be thinking about your particular students and where do they fall in this? Are these the students that we're talking about in our classrooms? In many of our self-contained classrooms, this is exactly who we're talking about. So how did they communicate? Their communication methods were speech, vocal approximation, sign language, gestures, communication boards with pictures, picture exchange system, speech generating devices or computers. So lots of different ways of communicating, not just speech. So again, thinking about our students, are these your students in your classroom? The types of literacy instruction that they looked at were things that we commonly think of, like sound blending, phoneme segmentation, letter-sound correspondence, knowing that B says ba, right? Decoding words, understanding the phonetics and being able to blend sounds into words, shared reading activities, sight word recognition, reading sentences and simple stories, reading comprehension. The instruction that they gave these students was one-on-one instruction, 1 to 2 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes. I think this is impactful because as we're looking at the results of this study, one of the things that everyone talks about in terms of being able to teach literacy to our students with complex communication needs is the amount of time that it takes. There's this idea that is an overwhelming amount of time, that we really don't have time to do this effectively. And I want to challenge that assumption. If you're looking at this research, we're talking about 30 to 45 minutes. And it doesn't have to be in one fell swoop, right? 30 to 45 minutes, 1 to 2 times a week. That's all we're talking about, right? And who are those instructors? Does it have to be the classroom teacher? Can it be parapros? Can it be adults who are volunteering in the school? How are we going to get that one-to-one instruction, right? So thinking about how would this look? Are we talking about your students? Are we talking about the skills that you're introducing? And then how are we introducing it? So what happened in this particular study? So one of the things they found is that all of the participants in the study made substantial gains as a result of the literacy instruction. I think the important word here is all, right? All of them made substantial gains. So there's no yeah buts here. Everybody except for this one kid who has more complex communication needs. All of the participants made substantial gains as a result of literacy instruction. And what else did they find? They found that all of the participants learned all of the letter-sound correspondences. All of them. Every student that participated in this study learned B says ba, and C is ka, and D is da. Every single student learned all the letters-sound correspondences. All of the participants acquired phonological awareness skills such as sound blending and phoneme segmentation. They learned to apply those skills during decoding and writing activities. Again, all of the students, all of the participants learned to read simple words. All of them. All of the participants learned to apply their decoding sight word recognition skills during shared reading activities. And finally, all the participants learned to read and understand simple sentences and stories. Now, when I have had this conversation when I've done presentations in some of my school districts with some of my teachers, I get a little pushback on this. I even had one group tell me, well, they don't mean our students, right? They're not talking about our students. So when we went back and we looked at the previous slide here and we discussed the participants again, we had to ask that question, right? So are your students not between the ages of 3 and young adult? Are these not some of the difficulties or the challenges that they have? Multiple special needs, CP, Down syndrome, apraxia, autism. The teachers admitted that in fact was the case. These are their students. This does describe their students. And then some of them even said, well, hey, yeah, those are our students, but we're not sure we believe the research. I think what that does for us is it tells us that our ideas about literacy, who we think it's for, are so ingrained in our belief system that we aren't even really looking at the clinical evidence of this. So we have to be really, really careful. Those belief systems impact how we provide literacy instruction for our students. When we're thinking about how we instruct our students in literacy, we need to decide whether our students we're going to be using emergent literacy techniques or conventional literacy techniques. And that sounds like something that would be really hard to figure out. But Copenhaver and Erickson have given us a very simple litmus test for whether a child needs to be working at the emergent level or the conventional level. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about our students in our classroom and we're going to ask, do they know most of the letters most of the time? If that's true, they do, then we're going to keep asking questions. They may be conventional literacy learners. Do they actively engage during reading? If that's true, we're going to keep on going, looking towards conventional literacy. Do they have a means to communicate and interact? So do we have an AAC system set up for these students? Are they able to interact and communicate? If they do, then we're going to keep asking questions. Do they understand that writing involves letters and words? Okay, so if the answer to all 4 of these questions is yes, then we're going to be engaging in conventional literacy intervention. So that's going to be the items on this side of the column. So guided reading instruction, word identification and decoding, writing activities, independent reading, communicating with symbols and with spelling. Now, if you answered no to any of these questions, then we're going to be working on emergent level interventions. So our activities we're going to be working on shared reading. We're going to be doing predictable chart writing, alphabet and phonological awareness activities. We're going to be working on independent writing. So we're still working on independent writing with these students, but we're going to give them access to a full alphabet, all the letters, so not just one letter of the week, right? We're going to work on independent reading with these children and individuals, and also symbol-based communication. So you can see at the emergent level, the differences here at the emergent level is we're not working on spelling per se, but we are working on writing activities. So what happens though if you look at your classroom and you say, well, some of my students are at an emergent literacy level and some of them are at a conventional literacy level. So what activities do I do in my classroom? So what Erickson and Copenhaver tell us that we do is we engage in activities that support shared reading, predictable chart writing, alphabet and phonological awareness during word identification, independent writing, and independent reading activities for everyone in the classroom. For those students that are at that conventional level, we're going to pull them to the side and we're going to work on guided reading and writing instruction. And we're not doing that with their other students. So you can do a lot of activities as a whole group, but then you're going to pull those students who are at a more conventional level aside to work on some of the more advanced literacy skills. All right, so talking through, we're not going to talk through all the different techniques for teaching literacy skills to our students, but there are a few that I think are really easy to begin with that I'd like us to discuss. So the first one is shared reading. So in shared reading, our primary goal is to maximize communication and interaction. So during shared reading, our goal is not to be answering questions. It's not about comprehension. It's about engaging and interacting. So those kids that you have in your classroom that are constantly jumping up to interrupt the story, those kids are doing exactly what we want them to do during shared reading. They're thinking about what they're hearing. They're relating it to activities and events in their own lives. So they're engaging and communicating. So that's what we want to see happening during shared reading activities. So what are the goals for shared reading and writing? They're to maximize interaction, to make connections to the text. Our adult is going to comment, not ask questions, but comment during the storybook reading. It is student-led. So it's not about our students sitting quietly and listening. It's really about them engaging, asking questions, and driving the discussion. And we're going to make sure that our students have access to their personal communication systems and that they are using those systems while we're reading our storybooks. So it's really, thinking back about how literacy is not just reading and writing, but it's also listening and speaking. During shared reading, you can really see that. The communication, the expressing yourself, that's the biggest part of this particular activity. We can still work on our core vocabulary, and most of you who are working with me have core vocabulary is a strong focal point in your classroom, and we're going to use our core words during shared reading to make comments. So we can say things like "look" and "oh, good, that's good," and I want to read some more. What is it, right? Ooh, that's different, right? So we're in our academic setting, learning vocabulary by comparing and contrasting, being able to say same and different. So how are we going to maximize interaction? There's a really nice little acronym that David Copenhaver was the first person I'd heard talk about this. And the acronym is CAR, and it stands for commenting, asking for participation, responding and repeating, and adding more, and waiting. So rather than a very complex prompting hierarchy for how we're going to help our kids interact with us and maximize their interaction, we're going to do these really 3 simple things. So as we're reading our story, we're going to stop and comment about what we're seeing. We're going to invite the students to interact with us. So we're going to ask them to if they have something to say about it. Have they ever seen this before? We're going to listen to what they have to say. We're going to repeat them so that they know that they were heard. We're going to add on to we're going to expand what they're saying to us, and we're going to give them time to come up with some of this discussion on their own. That's that waiting period, right? Saying something and then waiting to see if they have something that they would like to add on to the conversation. The next technique that I want us to talk about is predictable chart writing. Of all the literacy techniques, this is my most favorite activity. So predictable chart writing is a group activity that includes core word use, so working on those core words, right? Print concepts, writing and interaction around a shared topic. So what does predictable chart writing look like? right, so our goals. So here's a little predictable chart that one of my preschool classrooms came up with. One of the very first ones that they ever worked on. The goals for that chart were that they would have multiple communication opportunities. They would be learning concepts about print. They would have multiple opportunities to identify words. They would start working on spelling instruction, and that they would have some instruction on capitalization and punctuation. So they're learning a lot about what text looks like, how you use it, what it means. As the teacher's writing out the message, writing out the sentences on the chart paper, she's spelling out the words for the students, so they're getting to see spelling in action. She's capitalizing the first letter of the phrase. She's putting periods on the ends of the phrases. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? We're going to look at this in a step-by-step manner, all right? So the first step is that we're going to, on the first day, a lot of people spread this out day by day. So the first day we're writing the chart. The second day we're going to reread the chart that we wrote, and we're going to work with it. The third day we're working on cut up sentences from the chart. On the fourth day we can do this activity called Be the Sentence. We'll explain that in a minute. And then finally we're going to make a book out of our chart. Okay, so we're going to publish our writing. All right, so what is that, breaking this down a little bit, what does that writing the chart look like? All right, so the first thing we have to do is choose a topic. Now, in some of our preschool classes, we've been using the Tell Me AAC program, and that the topics come from a storybook. There's a storybook that's chosen that is used for 2 weeks, and we use that to set our topic. But a topic can be anything, anything that the students are interested in. The more involved the students are in choosing the topic, the more involved they will be in creating this chart. So I've seen teachers do charts about storybooks. I've seen students do charts about an activity that they did in their classroom, like a cooking activity or an art activity. I've even seen one of my classrooms did a predictable chart about their trip to the fair, the county fair, and all the things they smelled at the fair. The kids were very interested in that one. Lots of discussion about the stinky things that they smelled. So choosing a topic, like I said, the more engaged the students are in picking the topic, the more likely they are going to be to engage during the activity. The second thing that we're going to do once we've chosen the topic is we're going to choose that core-based STEM. Okay, so the STEM is sort of like, we call them carrier phrases in speech language therapy, speech pathology, but the core-based STEM is a beginning of a sentence that usually includes core vocabulary that doesn't change throughout the chart. So every sentence on the chart starts with this core-based STEM. So it might be something like, I see blank. I like blank, okay? For my students going to the county fair, it was, I smell blank, okay? So we're going to pick out that. Using core is a great idea because it gives us lots of exposure to those words that are very powerful for us in terms of communication. So this is a great opportunity for us to be pushing that core word knowledge. The third thing we do is we pick the sentence ending choices. So what are the options that the students are going to have for completing the sentence? So they're going to get a choice of, if we're doing brown bear, that's at the bottom of the screen here. We may talk about what we saw, right? So the core-based STEM might be, I see a blank, or I saw a blank. And then the sentence ending choices would be all the characters from the book. So the brown bear and the blue horse and the green frog, right? Then we're going to pick from there, we're going to figure out how does each student access those choices. So some of our students are going to understand a written word, and we might write the name of the animal that they pick. Other students may need a picture symbol, like from their communication devices. Other students may do better with a picture that represents the item in the book. And for some of our students, we're making object choices. So maybe we're picking a little plastic animal or a beanie baby. So we have to figure out how each student's going to access the symbols, and then how they're going to physically access. So some of our students may need to have an eye gaze frame that has their choices on it, or they may be able to touch with their fingers. So thinking about each child having the ability to access their choices while they're writing the chart. This is one of my favorite teachers Miss Teet works in a preschool special needs classroom, and she began working with the Tell Me AAC program, and one of the things that she was working on was predictable chart writing. So this is the first predictable chart that she ever worked on with her students, I believe. So you can see that she had choices for the kids. She used their names at the beginning, so it's a little different than I think. Initially it was designed to be to use the core word starter. She used the students' names in this. That's okay. I mean, I think down the road and subsequent iterations of this activity, Ms. Teet was using more of our core-based STEM, but in this is her very first one. So I think she did a nice job with this. So the topic was the bears. Saw A was our STEM, and then the animals were the choices. And then she used the student's name within each sentence. This is in this particular one, the next book, the topic was I went walking. The sentence stem was I saw a blank. Choices were animals, and then the presentation was the images from the book. Okay. All right. So once you've done that initial chart, you've written it out with the students. The next step is going to be to reread or work with the sentence strips. So we take that chart and we cut it into strips. So this gives you an example of really what that sentence strip is, or the sentences are supposed to look like. So I play with, that's the core STEM. The child chose Legos, and then once they make that choice, then we put the child's name at the end of it. So that's really what the sentences should look like: a core-based STEM, the choice, and then the child's name. All right, so you're going to cut those out, and we're going to start doing things like every child gets their own sentence strip, and we start pointing out the words and reading the words, noticing the spaces in between the words, noticing the periods at the end, finding our own name on there. So it gives us a time that we can start talking about those letters and those words and how they're spaced out, okay? We're going to then work with cut up sentences. So you take the sentence strip, we're cutting out each individual word, we're rearranging them, we're putting them in the correct order to make them sound right? So we're engaging with individual words. Now you let the children decide where to cut between the words. All right, so it's important they're doing the cutting, not us. And if they can't physically do the cutting, they're telling us where to cut. What that teaches children is it teaches them the boundaries of words, right? So it's not just a bunch of letters all pushed together, but they actually are separated by spaces. That's a tricky thing for students when they first start writing and reading to recognize, because their experience with language is through speech, and speech is an ongoing auditory signal, an acoustic signal that doesn't have those spaces in between words. So when we take that auditory information and we put it in writing, we put these artificial spaces there. But that's important for us to be able to write. So this, working with cut up sentences, helps students understand that spacing between words, right? What does a word mean? Okay. The next activity that they recommend that we can do is called Be the Sentence. So in this activity, those cut up words, each student gets to be one of the words, and then they can kind of rearrange themselves to create the sentence. It's a good time for kids to get up and move, practice saying their words. So it's kind of a fun little way to practice those individual words and to add some movement into it. Okay. That last step is making a book. So we take our predictable chart and we publish a book in some format with our sentence. So this was an example. The little girl's holding her sentence strip up. The teacher took a picture, took a regular spiral-bound notebook, glued the picture on. The child's sentence is written at the top, and then her name is written at the bottom. So every child has a page in this book. Okay, so then these books then become added to the classroom library, so students can go and read their own books at any time they want to. So during self-selected reading, they're able to pick up these books and read them. Now, there's other ways to do this that are a little bit more high-tech if you like high-tech options, right? So these 3 apps are apps that I found that really work well for developing storybooks, letting kids write their own books. Story Creator, Little Story Creator, and the Book Creator. I believe that these are all free apps, but I'm not positive about that. If they're not free, they're very inexpensive. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like. All right, so this is a little short video of what one of the books looks like from Storybook Creator when it's complete. So you can add, when you do it, you can add a picture, you can add text, you can add audio to the book. And then you can also match the audio up to the written text so that each word is highlighted as it's spoken. I like piano. I like saxophone. I like guitar. I like bells. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is alphabet and phonological awareness. How do we work on alphabet and phonological awareness? Well, the first thing is, I think, when children are young, it's a very typical part of our preschool day and our elementary day, that especially early elementary, for us to work on letters, names of letters. As children get older and become teenagers, preteens and teenagers, and then in particular as people become young adults, we consider the alphabet and phonological awareness as something that if they don't have it, if they don't learn it by the time that they are through elementary school, then they're not going to get it, and so we move on. The other thing that happens is, so they don't then have access to the discussion of the alphabet. The other thing that happens is that people get stuck in alphabet learning. So there's an idea that you have to learn the names of the alphabet in order to learn to read and write, and that's just simply not true, right? So we have students who are still working on the names of the alphabet letters as they enter high school. They're learning those letters. So we want to make sure that we're doing, as we're thinking about alphabet and phonological awareness, first of all, we're providing that instruction, but we are also not using alphabet instruction, alphabet naming letters as a gateway to being able to have other literacy experiences. So it's something that we need to teach, but we don't want to get stuck here, okay? For many years, we thought students had to demonstrate certain skills before we could teach alphabet and phonological awareness. When we now understand that students learn the symbols that we teach them. Students don't have to understand concrete symbols before we start to introduce and use more abstract symbols. This understanding led us to begin teaching the universal core vocabulary. That's why we teach core vocabulary symbols. It supports our efforts for alphabet and phonological awareness while we're still teaching kids to communicate, or teaching our students to communicate using the core vocabulary. So we're working on core vocabulary is important for students who don't have sufficient alphabet and phonological awareness and awareness of written text to be able to communicate in that way. But we still want to be working on our alphabet. All right, so what are the components of alphabet and phonological knowledge? All right, so it's comprised of knowing letter names and sounds, of making and selecting letters for writing, hearing the differences between words, cat and bat and mat and sat, right? Noticing syllables or parts of words. Noticing that the word insect has the core word in the front of it, right? Learning beginning sounds of words. So cat and cow and come here all begin with the same sound. And ending rhymes. That's back to our cat, hat, sat, right? So when we're thinking about working on our alphabet, we want to, I think the biggest rule, and it's probably the biggest rule in all of instruction, right, is don't be boring, okay? There are loads of interesting alphabet books out there in different formats, in printed versions and electronic versions. As far as printed books are concerned, we just go to the library. There's tons of books that are based on individual letter sounds, like starting letter sounds. Tar Heel Reader is a resource that I really, really love, and it's been around for many years. I think that Tar Heel Reader's probably at this point been around at least 25 years. When you go to Tar Heel Reader, what you're going to find is thousands and thousands of books that professionals and students and classrooms have written on an extremely wide variety of subjects that are appropriate for preschoolers and subjects that are appropriate for older adults, right? So as you're going in there, know that there's some books in there that are more appropriate for older people. There's a way to set a filter so that your students don't have access to things that are inappropriate for them. But it's good because remember we said that you might be an emergent reader when you're 25 years old, right? Emergent reader doesn't mean that you're just a child. So we want to make sure that we're giving students and individuals access to books that are appropriate for their chronological age. And when we have emergent readers, people who are working on emergent reading skills, who need to be working on their alphabet knowledge, it's not appropriate for us to have childish images and topics in our alphabet books. So on Tar Heel Reader, you're going to find a lot of alphabet books on a wide variety of subjects. There's alphabet books on superheroes and alphabet books on landforms. There's all kinds of alphabet books out there. So go to Tar Heel Reader, check it out. You can even write your own books in Tar Heel Reader. If you want to write your own books, the password to write your own books is literacy ! So it's a capital L, literacy ! So that's how you get in and you can write your own. You can write classroom books with Tar Heel Reader. You can potentially even maybe do some of those, those books that we talked about writing from our predictable chart writing. You could write those books and put them in Tar Heel Reader. Okay. Other things that we can do when we're working on our alphabet is go on a letter hunt. There's letters everywhere, right? All over our environment. So walking around our school and looking for those letters on schedules, on packages, on menus, on signs all around our school. Thinking about, oh, look, stairs starts with the same letters the staff room starts with, right? So being aware of the letters around us, our environmental letters. You can play card games to work on the alphabet. Now, I'm not recommending that you hold up flashcards, but you can play games, right? Game is the important word here in the card game phrase, right? We want to have fun with our alphabet. We can work with our own name. So our own name, working with those letters is very personal and motivating. So pulling out our names and comparing them to each other and looking at what they start with, sorting them out by initial letters. That's a very motivating activity that you can do that still really addresses those that alphabet knowledge. In beginning words, we can talk about the length of our words, right, and what they end with. Okay, what words have the same letter combinations. Okay. We can use our art activities to address letter skills, right? So we can work on our alphabet while we're creating paintings and creating activities in art, okay? While we're working on our alphabet, we're still working on our core vocabulary, right? So if we're reading, A is for ambulance, D is for drive, C is for car, B is for bike. As we're reading it, we're going to be using our core vocabulary boards to talk about it. Oh, A is for ambulance. That's something that we use to get help. D is for drive. Okay, we could turn the wheel, one of our first 40 core words, right? We can also sing with our letters, right? So raps and rhymes and poems and tongue twisters like this one. So I think that we're really good, especially at the elementary level, for pulling out YouTube and finding these alphabet-based songs. So this was one I don't feel like we have to do a lot of instruction on, but thinking about when you're watching them, not just watching the song, right, but then stopping it and talking about those letters and relating those letters to our own names. Who has a name that starts with a B, right? Okay, moving on. We want to think about our children's access to letters. So if our child has significant physical or visual sensory challenges, We may have to present the alphabet in different ways. So we may have to present it through Braille with them. We may have to use different highlighting with letters. If we have a student uses eye gaze to point with their eyes to the words on their communication system, we may need to take that alphabet and create an eye gaze frame so that they can look at the letters, so they can spell this way, right? They can look from board to choose the letter. The most important thing here is that we make sure that our students have access to the entire alphabet. That's something that we don't do a lot. I see in many of our classrooms we work on that letter of the week, but we don't give students access to all the letters to start playing with and learning about, right? You might focus on a particular letter, but you're going to make sure that they always have access to all of the letters. We're going to also talk today about independent writing. So independent writing is something, I think when we hear that term, I think that we immediately think about students who are more conventional writers. But it's not really just that. I mean, we work on independent writing with our students who are emergent at the emergent literacy level too. So think about how we work on writing with our kindergartners. We give them those pieces of paper that have a place at the top to draw a picture and then the little lines at the bottom, and we encourage them just to scribble, right? They're just scribbling. At the beginning of the year, they're drawing a picture that may or may not look like something, and they're putting scribbling down at the bottom of their page. And then over time, those scribbles start looking like letters, and then the letters start clumping together and looking like words until we're actually producing recognizable text. That is something that we need to give all of our students access to, even if our students aren't able to hold a pencil, right? We want to make sure that they still have the ability to play with putting letters together, right? We want to give them credit for writing, quote unquote writing, as they're just putting letters together and learning, because that's how we learn. When we're teaching independent writing, the process is there's an actual really specific process that you can access at the Literacy for All website. I put the little link down here at literacyforalinstruction.ca/writing / there's a 10-minute mini lesson first. Then we'd spend 20 minutes with independent writing with support as needed. And then we go to the author's chair, and that's a place where our students get to talk about what they wrote, to talk about their book, right? To read their book. So they see themselves as writers. And it doesn't matter if what they write, whether it's scribbles with a pencil or it's random letters, what seems to us to be random letters put together. Giving them the opportunity to see themselves as authors and explain what they wrote is a very important piece of this. That's that expressive communication, and they start attaching communication to text. Thinking again about that adaptation for students. These are two examples. I showed you the eye gaze board in an earlier slide. This is at the bottom right down here. This is a board that is set up to do scanning. So as for us to do partner assisted scanning. So the partner is going to point to each letter and wait for the child to indicate that that's the letter that they want to use. If the child cannot visually see the letters, then the partner is going to verbally out loud give the child choices and look for the child to then select a button. So do you want to use the A? Do you want to use the B, right? And the child can tell us yes or no, right? Okay. They may have adapted access to a keyboard. So, thinking about giving kids that need physical access differences, making sure that they have access to the letters. We don't have to just give them the standard keyboard. There's alternate keyboards that have color highlighting, larger keys. We can work with our occupational therapist to develop some tools, some pointing tools to allow students to be able to access a keyboard more effectively. So let's talk about what scribbling looks like if you're not using a pencil. I think we all know what scribbling means when we have a pencil, but what does it look like if a student is not using a pencil? So we're going to let our students have the opportunity to quote unquote scribble by just exploring choosing letters. And maybe at first those letters are going to appear really, really random. But as they're choosing those letters, we're going to apply meaning to those letters, right? We're going to talk about what the child is writing so that they start to experience that putting words together. Just like those kindergartners who at first are just scribbling on the page, we're going to let our children scribble, quote unquote scribble, by selecting videos. I love this video, so I want to give you a chance to see this.
That was a smile and a reach. Good for you. A for apple, airplane, alligator. B. Oh, he's reaching again. You must want to write a B. B for baby. Oh, you want to write a C? You want to write a C? You want to write a D? What about an E? You want to write an E? What an F? You want to write an F? You want to write a G? You want to write a G? How about an H? Oh, reaching for an H. H.
So you see what she's doing? You know, it's debatable, I think. Does this child, is he deliberately picking letters? Well, we don't know, right? But this teacher is doing such an amazing job in respecting what the child is selecting, describing how he's communicating. Oh, you smiled and reached. You must want the A, right? Explain to him, this is what you did to let me know what letter you wanted to choose, right? So she's reflecting how he's communicating. She's respecting what he's choosing. And then she's applying meaning to it. Oh, you picked G for go and great, right? She's adding meaning to those letters that the child is selecting. This is what initial scribbling looks like. I think that sometimes if we get really impatient about wanting kids to be able to show what they know. So we hesitate, I think, to provide students with the time to explore and play with letters and play with writing, because we're looking for proof that they understand it, but they need time to learn it, a lot of time to learn it, right? So I think knowing that, when we look at this, I think that one thing that helps me with this is knowing that there's really nice research out there that shows a progression. I've been able to see some of the research that's come out of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, of some writing samples where we're able to see where a child went from writing random scribbles to starting to put spaces between words to starting to actually spell recognizable text. So seeing that sequence, knowing that we have good research that tells us if we just stick with it, we're going to be able to make progress with our kids. So we don't just give up if they're not immediately writing words. And they're not writing words that we're telling them to write. So this isn't a task where the child is given a word. Okay, we're going to spell the word cat. Now match the letters to spell the word cat. It's autonomous writing. What is the child writing? What does the child want to write about? What's important to them? Okay, so thinking about the topics of our writing, again, remember that rule, don't be boring. We want to make sure that the kids have access to really interesting topics and that they have the ability to select the topic. So just like we said in predictable chart writing, if the student can pick the topic, they're going to be more engaged. So when we're doing our writing, we want to let them pick their own topic as well. Now, this is going to do something for us too. If we know the topic, we're more likely to provide relevant feedback. When they're scribbling, they're putting letters together, and we don't necessarily know exactly what is on their mind, right? But we're able to provide more relevant feedback if we have an understanding of the topic. So choosing a topic together can be very helpful for that. Now, these were some examples that I found on the Project Core website that people had chosen, that had photographs of things around their school, places that they've been, people at school, things that they've done at school. So they took pictures, everything they did, they took pictures of, and then they bound them so that then the kids would have some suggestions for what to write about. Remnant books are one of my most favorite things. We've been talking about remnant books for 25 years. The idea of a remnant book is that when you have an experience, that you bring back artifacts from that experience and you produce text around those artifacts. So it helps the students relate their writing to something that they've experienced. So maybe your class goes to McDonald's for a field trip and you bring back the McDonald's napkin. So that can be put in the book. Like this is an example of a book that was just made out of the little Ziploc pencil bags, right? You can do this. I've seen people do this with Ziploc baggies before. That works really well. You can use photo albums that have little pockets and put remnants in those pockets. But then you write about that, So the student decides what to write about. They can use their communication devices to decide what words they want to use to describe their remnant book with the support that they need. So, and remnant books can then go home and they can talk to their families about what they did. The families can participate in this by sending in their own remnants, right? So that the student can write about their activities at home. Finally, we're going to finish up today talking about independent reading. Independent reading is not something that occurs once you are at a certain reading level and you're able to pick up Gone with the Wind and read on your own, right? It's not something that occurs with a second grade reading level or fourth grade reading level. Independent reading is something that should occur at all levels of instruction. We want to make sure that we are increasing our children's motivation to read by letting them have self-selected topics, so letting them pick what they want to read about. The value of self-selected reading is it gives us a common topic of interaction for modeling and using core. So the child picks something that they're interested in reading about, and then we can talk to them about it. Again, it's sort of like that. When we know the topic, we can provide meaningful, relevant comments, right? So having a book that we're reading, that we're looking at, they've picked out and they're reading, it's something that we can talk to them about. We want to make sure that we have books that are age and interest respectful, right? Not just because a child is reading at a pre-primer level doesn't mean that the topics need to be things that are appropriate only for preschoolers, right? So thinking about their ages and what they're interested in reading about. We're going to let them read their own books. So remember, we've talked a couple of times today about making your own storybooks. So this is a way that they can read their own books. At the end of the day, that we have to remember our kids are only going to learn what we teach. If we don't teach literacy, if we don't discreetly teach the skills involved in literacy, our students are not going to learn it. I think we have this idea that our kids have to be ready for literacy. They don't have to be ready for literacy. They have to be breathing, and that's about it, before they're able to engage in activities that are at a minimum at the emergent literacy level. And if we don't stick with it with our kids and continue to offer them instruction, they're not going to learn literacy. The statistics on literacy levels for students who use augmentative communication is abysmal. And it's important that we are thinking about literacy instruction, because that is the only way that our students are going to be completely independent and autonomous communicators, is if they have the ability to write, spell, anything that they want to. So it's a goal that we need to be aggressively targeting for our students. This webinar, you're going to have noticed that I spent a lot of time referring to the work at UNC Chapel Hill, the Center for Literacy and Disabilities Studies. This slideshow is really a redelivery of their work, and is just really meant to introduce you to the idea of literacy instruction, some of the components of it. I would strongly recommend that you spend some time at project-core.com looking at the professional development modules and the Literacy for All website. These are the experts in the literacy world, and they're going to give you some really, really good ideas and the research behind them as you're working to improve the literacy skills of your students. Thanks so much for all of your time today, and I will look forward to our next chats on this subject.